If there's one thing that mortals and supernaturals of all kinds in the world of darkness can agree on, it's this. World War I was a cataclysm. It not only destroyed thousands of lives, not only did it scar the very world with the marks of its violence, but it also marked the death of old ways, old ideas, old certainties, old beliefs. The Ventrue were smart enough to keep their heads down and avoid the trenches, but many business interests that they depended on suffered greatly as a result of the devastation of the First World War, and took an even bigger hit in the purely economic sense when the Great Depression set in. Europe, the heartland of not just Clan Ventrue but the Camarilla as a whole, was devastated. A broken, shattered landscape struggling to recover. Is it any wonder then that when men like Mussolini and Hitler came along, some in the clan saw new opportunities and the hope of a new beginning? While many Ventrue washed their hands of the old world and crossed the Atlantic to America, many young Ventrue that remained behind became enamored of these new dictators and their promises and their ideas. In such mortal leaders, they saw another rise to greatness, a rebirth from the ashes. By contrast, the elders held such men in disdain. It's not that they had qualms about Nazism and fascism, such human ideologies held no weight with them. Rather, it was the fact that these two men struck them as demagogues, men who built their power base by appealing to the rabble. It was a kind of populism that was guaranteed to rub elitists like themselves the wrong way. What's more, many saw these dictators as a threat. Not so much the fascists, like so many movements before and after them, it was easy for the Ventrue to infiltrate them. But the Nazis were different, because unlike the fascists, who were purely materialistic, there were many within the new government of the Third Reich who believed in and possessed great knowledge of what was deemed the occult. What's worse, Hitler's paranoia of supernatural attempts to influence him made it damn near impossible for any vampire to get near him, let alone try to influence him. Humans with enough supernatural knowledge that they could not be so easily manipulated by the old tactics. That was definitely going to give the Ventrue pause. What's more, the Nazis were massacring Jews because they believed them to be part of a shadowy cabal subverting humanity from the shadows. If the Nazis ever discovered that there actually was a shadowy cabal secretly manipulating humanity, why shouldn't that murderous intent be turned against the undead? It would be the Shadow Inquisition all over again. Worse even, given that the Nazis had greater occult knowledge and more high-tech toys than the Inquisitors of old. Luckily, it never came to that. The Axis powers were crushed, and soon enough the post-war world settled into its famous two-way struggle between capitalism and communism, NATO versus the East Bloc. One of the perks of undeath is long memory, and there were many Ventrue that remembered how the Crusades pitted members of the clan against one another along religious lines. No such mistake would be made in the 20th. On both sides of the Iron Curtain, Ventrue entrenched themselves into government and industrial concerns, and cooperated with one another throughout the Cold War. Let the kind fight their stupid ideological war. Let the Clan of Kings profit from their conflict as they have always done. While it was not quite the glory days of the Victorian age, Clan Ventrue did reasonably well during the late 20th century. But of course, this was not without its problems and its dangers. There was the creation of the Anarch Free State in the middle of the 20th century, and while that soon fell apart, as many in the Camarilla had expected it would, the sudden inroads of the Cathayan vampires, or Kuei Jin as they are sometimes called, has raised significant concerns. Meanwhile, while many Ventrue in the West, particularly in America, did quite well for themselves during the Cold War, many East Bloc Ventrue found themselves in fierce competition with other clans, particularly the Bruja in Russia. And of course, when the Soviet Union finally collapsed, most East Bloc Ventrue were stripped of a good deal of their power, as the governments that they'd attached themselves to fell apart. Though some have compensated for this by infiltrating the Russian mob. However, throughout the Cold War, the biggest fear Clan Ventrue and the Camarilla as a whole had to worry about was the nuclear bomb. Hiroshima and Nagasaki awakened the vampires to the terrible reality that humans now possessed weapons that could wipe whole cities off the map. Simply going underground or laying low wouldn't save any kindred if someone decided to drop an atomic bomb on their heads. Some during the 60s proposed the idea that the Ventrue should acquire atomic weapons for themselves. But the idea was quickly dropped, mostly on the grounds that the Ventrue don't trust anyone, including their own, with such terrible weapons. And so, throughout the Cold War, they adopted a policy of making sure that only mortal governments controlled atomic weaponry. Naturally, their biggest nightmare scenario was the idea of the Sabbat getting their hands on a nuke. Given how inhuman and chaotic they often tend to be, there was no doubt that if the Sabbat ever got a nuke, they would use it. If anything, the end of the Cold War even heightened these fears, as with the fall of the Soviet Union, a lot of nukes began disappearing from official government storehouses thanks to black market arms dealers. Clan Ventrue was swift to act against these, hunting down any mortal who was willing to sell rogue nukes to states like Iran or North Korea, eliminating them, and then of course taking over their businesses for themselves. And so at last we have arrived at Clan Ventrue in the modern Knights, a clan that above all values power and a twisted mirror image of nobility. A clan with exacting standards over who they think is worthy to be embraced. Not just businessmen, although that is their stereotype, but also people in government, organized crime, the military, the clergy, and even some unlikely sources, labor unions and academia. After all, labor unions may seem a bit too proletarian for the Blue Bloods, but they are, after all, a political institution. And political institution means power. As for academia, even the most stuck-up elder knows that sometimes you need fresh blood and fresh ideas to keep a good clan going. And academicians, who are good at research and working within a social structure, can make for good assets. And given recent developments at the turn of the millennium, the Ventrue are going to need all of the help they can get, both to ensure Clan Ventrue's strength and dominance, as well as their ability to guide the rest of their wayward kindred onto what they think is the best path. The defection of Clan Gangrel in 1999 was bad enough, but then the Conclave of Prague happened in 2012, and the Bruja not only left the sect, but they killed several prominent Ventrue leaders, including Hardestat the Younger, on their way out. The Camarilla has managed to bounce back with the additions of Clan La Sombra and Banu Hakim, the former being especially satisfying since their gain is the Sabbat's loss. But the decline of their old enemy is cold comfort, as the Anarch movement, now reinvigorated, seems to have stepped into its place, as the principal opposition to the Camarilla. The system that Hardestat the Younger helped build at the tail end of the 15th century has been threatened in ways that it never has been before. And while the Ventrue have had to share power within the sect with those other member clans, in many ways they see the Camarilla as their baby, their project. And by hook or by crook, by fair means or foul, mostly foul, Clan Ventrue is determined to keep it going. The Gehenna Wars may have started, but they are still the Clan of Kings, the Blue Bloods. As far as they're concerned, the cream of the undead crop. They have ruled over large swaths of the world by night for thousands of years. And from the lowliest neonate to the most grand Methuselah, they intend to keep on ruling for thousands of years to come.